Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahirabbil alamin. Assalatu wassalamu ala anbiya wal mursalin. Allahumma salli ala sayyidina Muhammad fatil maqlib wal qatil ma sabaq nasir haq bihaq wal hadi ila siratal mustaqim wa ala alihi hamdaril azim. Alhamdulillah. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh everyone. Wherever you are, we pray for your well-being, good health and in a state of good iman inshallah after Ramadan. So tonight, another episode of Real Conversation at Sud Ilahi Facebook Live. And tonight we have a special guest also, is Dr. Omar Mahmood, who was born and raised in California, but right now working in Qatar. A bit about him, he also studied at Darul Mustafa with Habib Omar bin Hafiz, a unique sort of personality and scholar who I have been hosting at Sacred Path of Love for the past 5 years. And Dr. Omar is a clinical neuropsychologist and licensed to practice psychology in California and in the state of Qatar, as I mentioned just now. He has conducted numerous neuropsychology evaluations of children and adults. He is also experienced in providing evidence-based psychotherapy. Dr. Omar is bilingual in English and Arabic and has worked as a consultant neuropsychologist throughout the Middle East and North Africa region. MashaAllah, interesting. Dr. Omar graduated from University of California, Los Angeles with a Bachelor of Science degree in biology, and Arabic. And he then completed a Master Arts degree and doctorate of philosophy degree in clinical psychology from Wayne State University in Detroit, Michigan. Dr. Omar completed his clinical psychology internship at the University of California, San Diego healthcare system. His internship specialized in neuropsychology assessment and child adolescent psychiatric services. He then completed a postdoctoral fellowship in clinical neuropsychology at UC San Diego of Medicine, right? Inshallah. Prior to joining Sidra, Dr. Mahmood was a staff neuropsychologist at Executive Mental Health in Los Angeles, California, and assistant project scientist in the Department of Psychiatry at UC San Diego, where he was involved in cognitive neuroscience research on brain maturation and function. He frequently gives community lectures on topics of mental health, brain development, and psychology from an Islamic perspective. In addition, he has served as an ad hoc reviewer for various peer-reviewed scientific journals in the fields of substance use, psychology, neuropsychology, and neuroimaging. Inshallah. Right. So amazing to have him tonight, a man of experience and knowledge in psychology and Islamic sciences. Now we welcome him on board, inshallah. Inshallah, Doctor. How are you?
Assalamualaikum. Alhamdulillah.
Salam. MashaAllah, nice to see you again. And we had a very beautiful and interesting experience during Ramadan. And
yes.
Yeah, and so, MashaAllah, we are looking forward to tonight. And I think a lot of things that we like to share with you and also to listen to your experience and your knowledge so that we can learn the society way of seeing things in life and even for ourselves too. Because tonight's topic, I think, touches a lot in many people's life, all across, especially in countries like Singapore and maybe America and even Qatar. You know, you're developing, and I can say that honestly, that like 25 years ago, this sort of topic actually affect my life so much actually, because I wasn't doing well in academy and I wasn't interested in vocational training. I was lost actually. I was a lost soul at that point of time. But only after my national service in the army and so on, where someone brought me to meet the late Habib Ali bin Jafar Ali Drus from Batu Pahat in Malaysia, where I was asking him like, you know, Habib, I do not know what to do with my life. And he was smiling and he said, What you mean you don't know? Because at that point of time, you were thinking like you do not have a degree or you do not have a diploma, you can't move on like your friends, you know. They have everything. They have the college and everything. So Habib Ali was looking at me and then he smiled. He said, "Do khidmah." I said, "Do khidmah. Khidmah opens up everything." He said to me, and this where I am then. 20 years later, mashallah.
Mhm.
Alhamdulillah. So I think the question that a lot of people are actually not say the question, but generally people also like to know because there's a lot of fear. You know, like if you don't gain this, you are not going to be successful. And we talked about it last year. You also talk about failure and so on, right? So oftentimes, doctor, how do we nurture positivity? But because we are always entrapped in materialistic society, rat race, you know, a society that is driven by wealth and success is purely material, right? So as a Muslim, right, we often differentiate between success in the world and success in the next. So that means we separate. We felt that it's not together, right? Do you think these are the two separate things or they are correlated in a way how we define success in our society as how we look at it? Yeah.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala ali Sayyidina Muhammad. Thank you, Khalid, and thank you, Sotilahi, for inviting me. It's always a pleasure to have these conversations. And yeah, the idea of success in this life or in the hereafter, that's kind of like a major struggle for the believer always, because we are also human beings. We're part of the material world, but then we are also eternal souls inside, you know, and that we're connected to the hereafter. And I think, you know, the famous dua, Rabbana atina fid dunya hasanatan wa fil akhirati hasanat. You know, oh Allah, we ask you for good things in this life and in the hereafter. It means that it's not like mutually exclusive. It's not that to be spiritual, to be religious, it means that you completely ignore the success as defined by the dunya, by this material world. You can look to that type of success, but you can't do it without the success of the afterlife. So the two have to be balanced in a way. And if you do end up losing one, you would rather lose the material world than your fate in the eternal world in the hereafter. That's kind of the standpoint, the spiritual standpoint that we're trying to come from. But the world, like you said sometimes we compare ourselves to our friends. We're going through various stages in our life, and we notice that, hey, these people look really successful. They got a house, they got a car, they got a job. Where am I? How come I'm struggling on some of these things? And it's very natural for us to do that comparison in our mind when we're thinking in a very worldly way about the material world. And it can be very distracting. So I think we have to admit that and not be too hard on ourselves that, why am I thinking about this world? I should only be thinking about the next world. You know, I think it's a little bit hard to ask since we have very real circumstances that we're dealing with. You know, we're financial situations, family situations, career, life, all of these things kind of, you know, interfere with us on a day-to-day basis. So it's very difficult to say, I'm just going to completely ignore it. So I think you have to pay attention to it. You just don't want to become completely overwhelmed by it and have that be your singular only way in which you look for success.
Yeah, mashallah. But doctor, how is it then? You know, it's not easy, even for myself. I went through a lot of struggle because I felt that I'm not worth it. I felt that I'm way behind those people, right? And when I saw people going to work, and I was like, what, you know? But for me, the escapism was the hardcore scene. You know, I was in the music scene, that music scene actually helped me to grow, in a sense that I find something that I'm comfortable with, like a home, and it bounces back, like it has the same mentality as me, like, we don't want to live in the corrupt world. We don't want to be, materialistic. We want to be like it's a cold hearted world. But for people who naturally, they came out and they saw like what's there for me, and I'm not maybe even a diploma, like, for example, naturally you will feel deprived. But for such people, right, in your experience as a psychologist and also traditional practitioner, learning traditional Islam, how do we go about in this balance? Like, I live my life as it is, and Allah will take care of me. How
Yeah.
psychologically we can have that in our mind?
Yeah, I think we have to, again, realize that it's going to be a struggle. It's going to be usually you end up self-correcting a lot. You get to one side and you have to self-correct back. You might waver to another side, you have to self-correct yourself back. And that's okay. It doesn't mean that you're a failure. It just means that that's the nature of the human struggle, and especially if you're a spiritually minded person. So yeah, you may be distracted and wondering how come they have this and they achieved this, but I did not achieve that yet in my life, or maybe I will never achieve that. And you start doing that comparison, and you just have to, one strategy is that you just, that our scholars tell us, if it's a worldly matter, you should not be looking at people who are like always higher than you. You should look at also people that were quote unquote lower than you, just in the material world. It doesn't mean they're lower than you spiritually in their actual spiritual rank. They may be much higher than you, but just in terms of their worldly wealth, their, what they amassed, what they were able to do, some people do not have the same opportunities. And when you compare yourself to that, you will start to feel very blessed and realize that you actually have a lot. And maybe you are already successful, but you just don't realize it. Maybe you've already met the definition of success according to someone else. So you have to kind of reorient your viewpoint to make it more in line with, okay, I can be at ease, I can be in peace. Because ultimately, they have those memes online. There's like these memes on Instagram, right? Where there's like a woman on one side of the fence, she has only one flower, and she's just so happy and ecstatic. And on the other side of the fence is a woman, she has a whole garden of flowers, and she's sitting there depressed, and sad and wishing she had more. And those two people are in very different situations, but they also have very different definitions of success. And they were just like, I'm so happy with whatever I have, whatever it is, even if it's a small amount. That person is much more in a state of contentment. Whereas the other person, it seems that no matter what they gather, no matter how much wealth and how much possessions they amass, they're not at peace spiritually. They're not in a state of serenity in their heart. So we have to send ourselves these messages, because it's very clear that just simply attaining a materialistic definition of success will not necessarily translate to, peace of mind, serenity, happiness, and these kind of things.
Interesting that you mentioned about serenity and peace, because I think a lot of times people want success. Their definition of success is happiness. So they felt that this equal to happiness. If I had achieved something, it would be happiness, right? So I read about a study where participants were asked whether they believe money can bring happiness. The majority said no. But when they were asked to indicate what would make them happier, the majority indicate having more money. Yeah. It seems that most of us, including myself, are like that. Because our security is like, the more money you have, the more you feel secure, and the more you feel the betterment of yourself. Right? We know money doesn't bring happiness. but we behave as though it does. Right? Why do you think most people have this connection? How is it that we know material things can't bring happiness, but we act or behave as if it is going to give us happiness? Yep.
Yeah, I think that's the strange dichotomy between, our worldly side and our spiritual side. Those two sides are sometimes in battle with each other. When you sit theoretically and think about it, you know that money won't bring you happiness. You know that in concept. But then suddenly when you're faced with a bunch of money in your hand, your nafs gets involved, the ego, the desires get involved, and you may just gravitate towards it as an automatic, sort of desire that you're trying to fulfill. And it's no secret. Yeah, if you have a lot of money, usually then there are some hardships that you can kind of just pay your money and get away. You don't remove a lot of hardships from your life. You don't have debt. You don't have to worry about buying food, providing for your family. You have a lot of worries that seem to go away, with a lot of money in that sense. But those are very short-term things. The long-term idea of like peace of heart, when you look at your whole life and feel like I'm content, I feel like I'm in a good place with my Lord, my relationship with Allah, like that kind of stuff is, it's not going to be dependent on these little short-term, temporary kind of, pleasures that we may get from having money in a moment. And I think people, they have to remind themselves of that, so it's a contradiction. We know that in the long term, the larger sense, it doesn't really matter how much money you had if your attitude is very negative, but we also need to recognize it. It doesn't mean that we live in the world without any kind of money and we don't want to get a job and we don't want to do anything, because we know it does help in some short-term temporary situations to reduce, the pain and the kind of the hassle that it is to live in a material world.
Yeah, interesting. Through your saying that. So there are times when there are times where after one has managed to attain a certain status, right, they hold on to it. They try to, I think the right word would be sustain it. They try to sustain it permanent, right? Own a big house and has a lot of wealth. One no longer has empathy for those who are poor because you're changing. And you thought like all this is coming to you because you are able to get it through yourself. That means you're better than someone, right? Yeah. And thinking that rich people, like poor people, they don't work long enough, smart enough, or hard enough, and rely on handouts. There's some charity or system where government gives handouts, and are in a state of poverty because of their own bad choices they make. Some. However, we know as a Muslim, right, doctor, the poor too has a place in society. So my question is, how exactly can we ensure that our wealth does not make us arrogant, psychologically and spiritually?
Yeah, that's a great question. I was talking once with a close friend of mine, and we were wondering, like, what if you were to suddenly become very rich, very, very rich, where you don't have any worries? It's as if you have no bills to pay. There's nothing because you're just so rich. And would that change me into an arrogant person? Would that mean that you can't empathize anymore? You're going to become very, selfish,
Yeah.
and very kind of mean, and like, will it change you fundamentally? And I think it kind of depends on what you went through in your life. If you have experienced poverty, or if you have experienced struggle, then it's possible, if you can hold on to that memory, you will always be appreciative for the rest of your life. Whatever states you go through, you'll realize that, like, this is just the nature of the world. The other thing is, people have to remind themselves at any moment Allah could take it away. You know, it's not as if it came to you by the decree of Allah. It could leave you by the decree of Allah. You know, it's not really like just your own power and your own choices that bring you the material wealth that you gain in your life. It's whatever the rizq is that Allah has written for you. And so if you look at it from that standpoint, it really removes the ego and be like, oh, I accomplished this. I was able to do this. How come these other people can't do it? When in the reality, it's really Allah choosing to bestow certain blessings on us in a certain moment. And if you can keep that perspective, then, you know, I've met some very, very rich people who are extremely humble, you know, and I'm sure you have too. Khalid, you know, there's certain people, they're very wealthy, they have a nice home, they're able to host a lot of people, but they're also very, you know, khidma oriented, service oriented people, and they're very humble. They don't put themselves out there and think they're better than other people, because I think in their mind they know that God has given them a certain rank without them even like doing. It's not from their own doing, it's from Allah, His will. And so then when you realize that, you just feel like blessed and lucky to be able to serve, you know, and be a tool that Allah can use. Those are the most, you know, spiritually minded people. At the same time, you have to kind of also give a lot of your wealth in charity, in zakat, because it's the idea is that it can, you know, people believe it can corrupt you, and to a certain extent, that's true. You know, like the poor person has less opportunity to just simply be arrogant, simply be sinful, if in terms of, you know, access to things, money. So there's that as well. The mindset in the end is the most important thing, you know, keeping the mindset. And as our teachers would tell us, you know, our mashayikh from Hadramaut, they would say that the dunya, you need to keep it in your hand, not in your heart. You know, once it starts to enter the heart, then you start to chase after the material world as if that was going to fulfill your desire. But if you just use it as a tool, you simply look at it as a tool. You're not attached to it emotionally. I'm attached to it. If it comes, it's great. If it goes, that's by the will of Allah. You know, like you have to have this kind of a nonchalant attitude towards it, which is also difficult because you still have to fulfill your responsibilities. You still got to pay your bills. You know, you can't. It's a weird balance that we have, and I know it's not easy all the time, but it's that attitude. At least you have to have that mental mindset.
MashaAllah, Doctor. Thank you very much for the details in explaining to us in everything that nothing wrong being rich, but there is something wrong being rich also if you're not careful with what you do with your wealth and so on, inshallah. I think the problem today is that people are so literal. People are so straightforward in the sense that they do not know to see things beneath what it is. Like, you know, the Sahaba used to be very rich, and some of the Sahaba, I mean, like Sayyidina Abu Bakr, Sayyidina Uthman ibn Affan, Sayyidina Abdurrahman Auf, you know, they say that they were millionaires during their time. But getting to that also in today's context, they will always say that to be rich, you have to have a proper, good education. And I know some scholars disagree with it. I remember Sheikh Hamza Yusuf, he used to say that education doesn't mean to make more money, right? But it is our stereotype because of the materialistic world that we are living in today, right? So we often hear this opinion that having good education and subsequently having a good career is the answer to all these sort of social illness. For instance, they say that if people are educated, then there won't be domestic violence, for example. Or recently, I saw this comment where a person said, if a certain race has more wealth or having more wealthy people, then they won't face so much racism. But we know, and that is not exactly the truth. Abuse and racism will still exist even if every single person in society is wealthy. It's not a perfect world anyway. So this is because social illness stem from the inner self. Can you elaborate a bit more on that part, Doctor?
Yeah, I think, subhanAllah, especially now in the time that we're seeing in the world right now, you have the coronavirus, which is kind of evening the playing field from everyone. It doesn't really matter if you're rich or poor. It's showing, but there are discrepancies where certain people from certain social economic classes are disadvantaged because they may not have access to the care, access to the healthcare, the testing, the safety, the luxury of being able to work from home. Some people in higher levels of socioeconomic status, they have the luxury to work from home and still get their salary. But other people who are in a laborer or a more hands-on manual type of job, you have to be present there. You can't just sit at home and work. And so some people, there's a discrepancy that's happening. Some people are unable to work in this time, and that's causing a major, I think, unevenness in the opportunity and in people's exposure to danger. And then, as you said, racism. Racism is a major, major problem around the world. And where I come from in America, it's a huge issue right now that's getting a lot of attention on social media and in the news because of the Black Lives Matter movement. Although racism has been part of the American history since the inception of the country. And the idea that, if you just simply inject wealth into everybody, that will somehow create an equal platform for everyone. You still have to deal with the problematic attitudes of white supremacy or this idea that one race is superior over another. Because right now, that creates whole systems of oppression that you can't just simply get out of with a little bit of extra wealth. Because there's a number of cases where you could have a Black family that's actually quite wealthy, and they're still discriminated against. They're still treated with racism, and their lives are still put in danger sometimes because of systemic racism that exists. So, that is a very good lesson for us as Muslims, which is we can't just simply focus on material wealth as our definition of success. What about equality? What about justice in a society? What about making sure that opportunities are not denied from someone based on their skin color or based on their ethnic origin or language or culture or religion? Like we need a stronger sense of what is the definition of success beyond just that material, money-oriented way of looking at things. So it's our job to kind of I think in society, broaden the meaning of what a successful society looks like.
MashaAllah, Doctor. Beautifully said by you. Thank you very much. Another question that people always like to ask this question, Doctor. How do I educate my children not to be materialistic since they are young? So what are the steps and what are the things that I can do? Nowadays since young, we are living in a social media age where children will be able to see everything, right? They will see everything. So how do parents then engage in such a manner that it didn't corrupt them or it didn't affect them mentally, spiritually, and even maybe even physically, because they see that, this person is better than me in certain ways?
Yeah, mashallah. I mean, teaching our children these things, it's very important because early in your life is where you sometimes learn a lot of these attitudes. And it's very difficult to shift once you've been raised in a particular outlook on the world. So we want to, with children, one thing I think is very important to emphasize the idea about the concept of rizq, that Allah, is the one who decides what are the material possessions you're going to have, what are the opportunities you're going to have, what are the jobs you're going to have in your life, and understanding that there's a sense of gratitude for what you have, no matter what you have. I think we have a lot of young children that grow up without any gratitude. They enjoy what they have. They feel they're entitled to what they have, and they don't realize that like they should be extremely thankful for what they have. And you have to have a spiritual mindset, a theological mindset, to understand that all of these things are coming from one source, from Allah, and that at any moment it could change. Sometimes families go through ups and downs. The idea that when you're in good times, you should be helping out others who are in bad times. You should be donating, doing service. You should be with the understanding that you may be the one who's in a low moment at some point. I think we always want to give our children a sense of safety and security, which is understandable. I get that as a parent. But I also want to teach my children that the world is a place of tribulation. It's a place of tests and trials. And so the less attached you are to the world, I think the easier time you're going to have going through those tests and tribulations, because you won't be as disappointed if you lose out on something or something turns out a way that you didn't exactly expect it to be. So teaching them that, the same concept that the dunya is a tool for us, but it is not the goal. It is in itself is not the goal. And that could be money, that could be wealth, that could be status, fame, even, social media is a very, very challenging thing for many children, young people, because they're always looking for likes. They're looking for people to, repost their posts. They want subscribers and followers, That's the current way that social media is teaching our kids to think. And we have to kind of do the opposite and tell them that's not the point of it. If you want to produce some content, if you want to put something artistic out, then great, that's your service. That's what you're doing. That should be your point, not really how many likes you get or how many followers that come out of it. So we have to kind of keep sending these messages consistently to our children that we, as a spiritual people, we have a different whole set of definitions for success than maybe the regular materialistic society has. And you just kind of keep emphasizing we're a little bit different. We look at this, we look versus that. And, it's kind of a tricky thing, because some people will say you should take your child and go visit a poor place and show them what poor people live like, so they feel more thankful. And I get the idea behind that, but the possible problem with that is then you're sort of objectifying the poor people. You're kind of using them as like a prop, and maybe that's not the most dignified way to visit those people and help those people. And you're kind of teaching your child that you can be their savior, you can be their one to help them out. So you got to make sure the messages are very clear. I think though the idea of visiting a more simple, a more traditional way of life, whether you go visit relatives in a small village or you go travel and just see parts of the world where people live differently, the child then learns, oh, the way that I live my life, that's not necessarily how people around the world all live their life. And you want them to have a sense of appreciation, to compare and to understand, oh, this isn't just entitled to me and I deserve this and I always get this. Not necessarily true. If you look around the world, people live in many different kinds of circumstances. So teaching the child that is a tricky thing. You want to do it in a way that still gives them the lesson, but also does not treat someone else with disrespect or lowers the dignity of someone else.
MashaAllah, Doctor. Beautifully again, you explain everything in detail. SubhanAllah. May Allah preserve you. But Doctor, there is always this idea or thoughts that we always know. Maybe you're from America, in California, there will always be a ghetto area. They call it ghetto. And in fact, in many parts of the world, we do have such places where they call it ghetto and where the poor people always live. And there is always a huge stigma that these poor people are not meant to be successful. And they are not able to get a good grade in school or good career or even start a simple business. And it's like as if they are condemned, and I use the word condemn, I don't do it because people condemn them, right? They are condemned to the point where there is no hope, there is no success for you, so you got to take it whatever there is for you, right? So how do we understand this psychologically and spiritually? And because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is fair, is just, and Allah himself said that in the Quran, where we know Allah said He will not change the state of the people until they themselves change themselves. So how all these are related? And is it to say unfair for children who brought up in such an environment? Yeah.
Yeah, mashallah, that's, that there's a lot in that question there, but and I'm, for me personally, these days I'm very kind of consumed by what's going on in the media and what's in the situation in America right now. With the more and more people learning, getting more introspection, understanding how privilege works, and understanding that there's parts of society that are systematically oppressed, and it has nothing to do with their own abilities or to succeed or to uplift themselves. It's actually built in a way where they're kept under an area of oppression. And like you said, there's cut off from opportunities. So you can't learn, you can't expand, you can't get economic opportunities. All of that is by design, and it's by human design, not by Allah. It's not by Allah. It's by people basically abusing the blessings that Allah has given them, and then they try to oppress other people so that they can somehow maintain and increase their wealth. And it's our responsibility to learn about this first and understand where we can be allies to the people who are being oppressed. In the end, the Muslim always stands with the oppressed people. Even if you have to stand against your own community, if there's oppression within your community, sometimes you have to speak up and stand up against your own community. So this is something that we have to kind of understand and get this mentality out of our mind. Nobody is destined to be a failure in this world just by the simple rank of their color of skin or where they live, what part of town they come from. Everybody will go through ups and downs in life, and we don't actually know, I don't know what you're destined to be and what I'm destined to be. Like, I can't define all those things. So we have to understand that, but that's different than systematic oppression that's reducing a certain people to a certain place in society and not allowing them to uplift themselves. So we need to do our part and be very introspective. It still applies. Whoever changes within themselves can change, then Allah will change their situation. Meaning you may be harboring within yourself attitudes of privilege, bias, racism, prejudice towards a certain people that come from a certain background or place or economic status. And you need to change that within yourself. If you can change that within yourself, then you yourself may actually become the tool by which Allah will uplift and improve the society. You will become more aware, you'll be a better ally, you'll support those people who are oppressed. So you do need to do some internal work first and admit what your biases are, and admit where you may be gaining privileges and taking advantage of the situation instead of giving opportunities, helping people who are being blocked from those opportunities. So you still do that internal work. That's a key part of the spiritual nature of the journey of a Muslim, is that you need to do a lot of internal work. You got to look at your own attitudes internally. And then you may be actually, if you can uplift yourself and get to a sense of spiritual cleansing, you may be actually someone who could help support justice in the society. But if you are sitting there with your own racism and your own negative attitudes and views, it's going to be very hard for you then to be that tool of justice to help other people, so that the society may not change if figure that out within yourself. But I think this idea that those people are always destined for failure. One, it's whose definition of failure and success are we talking about? And as I pointed out before, there are people who we assume are lower than us, you know, who are less than us because of some outward physical or materialistic reason, but actually inwardly and spiritually, they are way above us, high ranking above us, closer to Allah. And if that's the case, then you really got to be humble, man. You got to be like, I can't really look at my material wealth and somehow define that as my rank spiritually, you know, how I'm going to end up in the hereafter. So that's another thing that we have to kind of constantly keep in mind.
Thank you, Doctor, for that beautiful explanation. I think we needed to hear that to analyze ourselves or how we treat people and how we see society. And it doesn't mean that they are poor, they are lower than us. You never know that we made, like what you said, in COVID-19, I myself saw a lot of bosses went bust. You know, even in Singapore, big company have to close down like Robinson and so on. So it's a awakening. It's like a wake up call and saying that everyone needs each other. Even the rich need, you know, the poor for service or even to buy their product. You know,
Right.
So it is like ignorant. All those why we thought like we are the best because we make money out of people. And now at the time when Allah showed to us like actually you need each other. Subhanallah. Doctor, coming to just now you were mentioning about failure. And okay, sorry, before that, anyone who wants to send question to Dr. Omar, you can send to 906-87106. I keep forgetting every time I ask you a question because, you know, people are asking and how to send the question to you. Alhamdulillah. So coming back to that, failure, right? Just now you're mentioning, everyone mentioning quite a number of times failure. I had my talk on failure at Sacred Path of Love 2 years ago, right? And I shared that to me, for what I had learned in my experience in the beginning, I shared with you with Habib Ali bin Ja'far al-Idrus. And when I said that, you know, I don't know what to do in my life, and he said, khidmah, just khidmah, Khalid. And this khidmah will open up a lot of things for you. And on top of that, he said to me, don't be afraid of anything in life because there is nothing in life. There is only Allah. So I somehow resonate that with failure because I told the participant, I said, there's no failure. There is only Allah. Of course, that is some sort like related to Sufism, deeper sense of knowing. But do you think that as a Muslim, we should change the perception towards that? Like, no, it's not a failure. It's a process of your journey in life, you know, and sometimes you forgot that through that process of difficulty and struggle, Allah is the one who make you able to achieve something that is greater beyond what you expect because you didn't give up on His mercy. So
Right.
how do we explain to that to people, especially young people, right? Because they felt that one time they sleep, that means that it's harder to stand up and achieve more because life is social media. You know, life is like, okay, how many likes I have and this is who I am, but boom, it's not who you are. You have to struggle. You have to go through this process of a lot of things that make even you lose yourself. Right, Doctor? So how do we explain them? Or can we say there's no such thing as failure?
Yeah, mashallah. I think it goes back to the same idea of definitions, right? How do you define failure? How do you define success? Some people, there's a, I've talked about it before, but how I train jujitsu, and in the jujitsu community, they have a very common saying, which they say is, there's no losing. You either win or you learn. Like if you tap out to someone and that your opponent, is able to defeat you, you can still take that as a learning moment, and you reframe it in your mind that, okay, this wasn't a loss. This was actually a learning opportunity for me. And that I think deals with the attitude that there is no actual failure in life. It's just, learning opportunities, different ways in which you can see success manifest. And at the same time, it's easy to say that, but then if someone is dealing with something very difficult in their life, a loss of a loved one, a loss of a business, a loss of, a marriage, a work, a job opportunity, something that's very devastating perhaps to you, you may feel in that moment like you failed, and that's okay. That's a human feeling that we all go through. And the major thing is, though, do you allow that to define you? Do you allow that to be something that weighs over you for the rest of your life? Or do you take it in that moment? You maybe have some time of feeling upset and sad, and then you reshift your mind and you move on to something else. And still, you can even have the memory of that failure, but you're using it as a motivation or a sense of a learning point. I learned this about myself, or I learned this about the world because of that experience. And that way you can still utilize it in a positive way. So I think in that sense, if your goal is to just, some people, they get very focused on failure. And they say, I'm a failure, I'm never going to succeed, this is going to be me. And I usually tell people like that, like, maybe you just have really high standards or definitions of success. For some people, if you have a chronic medical condition, the fact that you just woke up and and took a walk and drank some water, that's success. You're like, great, I had a good day. The rest of the day doesn't really matter. I've defined it. I won today, by simply waking up and doing a few activities, so we have to also understand that, like, maybe if we just shift our meanings, that's a very simple example I'm giving, obviously, but the concept still applies, which is there are certain very basic things that you could focus on, and you still think about Allah. Did you make dhikr today? Did you make your prayer? Like, did you just say one, dua today? That alone may be your definition of success. And you say, okay, great, I won today, I had a win. And then every day is like that. If someone has that attitude, it's very hard for them to feel like they failed, because everything else is extra to them. That's just an extra added benefit, that if I was able to achieve something more beyond that. So I think we also have to remind ourselves that it's very helpful to have the spiritual, theological understanding in your mind. Allah never makes a mistake. God never makes a mistake. So if you're sitting there and you're thinking, oh, this is all wrong, I should have been here, but I'm here right now, you're implying that somehow God made a mistake. You're in the wrong situation where you should be. You should actually be in a different situation. But maybe you are exactly where you should be in that moment, to learn something, to maybe meet someone, to help someone else. Maybe it's not about you. Maybe it's about someone else you're actually helping in that moment. If you can reframe it in your mind, then and always remind yourself that Allah had some plan. We're not just placed on this planet for whimsical purposes. We're placed on this planet for a reason, and Allah has a plan behind everything that we experience. It's not just a random set of occurrences. Then I think that also helps to reframe the idea in your mind, to help you realize, okay, maybe I shouldn't consider this a failure. Maybe there's something to gain out of it. Maybe there's a learning piece out of it. Or maybe this is just the nature of being in a place, the dunya, which is filled with tests and tribulations. And that's okay too. The hereafter is what we're really after anyways.
MashaAllah. Beautifully said, Doctor. Thank you. I have few questions coming in now. I think I asked this first question. Dear Doctor, I used to earn $8,000 a month, and I'm a senior manager of certain company. He doesn't want to reveal it, right? What happened to me was that it was it was a fine gradual growth on my career, right? But suddenly, after I earned 8,000 for 4 years, I thought that was like the pinnacle point of like I made it. I really made it. 8,000. I never thought that I will be earning such income, such amount in my life. But somehow after 4 years, suddenly I felt the void in my heart. I felt I felt there is something missing, or I couldn't find the peace that I'm looking for. I pray and I seek for peace, but somehow I could not resonate to why I'm feeling the conflict in me. I decided to quit my job 2 months ago, and fatally, it was COVID-19 too. So my question is this: how do I deal with myself right now? I'm in such a terrible state, doctor.
Mashallah. May Allah make it easy, inshallah, for everyone
I
who's,
mean,
going through difficult times, difficult financial times, family times, life, or daily life is struggle. And the COVID-19 doesn't unfortunately help for many of us. So we pray that Allah eases the burden and
I mean,
grants a sense of peace and serenity in the hearts of our brothers and sisters, and
I mean,
removes and dispels their sadness. Um, that's a very interesting point, though. It's like you make a certain amount of money, and then after a period of time, the nafs is not satisfied. It wants more. It starts to get bored and feel like, okay, what's the big deal? I'm making this amount, even though a few years ago that would have been like, oh, I made it, I'm successful. But then after a while, human, this is the nature of humans. We become complacent, and we start to think, I want more, or this isn't really a big deal anymore. This is just boring, and you start feeling empty inside, and you start maybe not appreciating what's around you. So you have to do this active exercise of being mindful and being aware of your blessings. It's not easy. It's a spiritual skill that you have to just develop and practice, which is looking at your situation and trying to count up the things that you want to be thankful to Allah for. You start with very simple things like your physical health, your ability to breathe and sleep and eat, or people in your life, or your ability to see the sun, or feel the rain, or eat a piece of fruit, very simple things. And you'll start to realize you cannot count up all the blessings that Allah has given you in your life. It's just impossible. There are too many to count the number of them. And once you start getting involved in that it's a meditative process of thankfulness and gratitude, then it almost kind of doesn't matter what situation you're in. You could be in a state of high economic state, low economic state, a lot of friends, no friends, popular, not very popular, big job, small job. It doesn't really matter then at some point, because then you're able to kind of always recenter Allah in your existence. You always turn back to Allah. And this is the nature of dhikr, right? Dhikr is constant remembrance and reminding who is at the center of your universe. Should be Allah. And we forget it though. We're forgetful beings. Human beings forget. That's why we need dhikr. Dhikr is a remembrance, to sit and remind ourselves. You do that through meditation, reflection, dhikr, prayer, any kind of thing that makes you more mindful of the reality of the situation. So then, then you don't have to define who you are based on how much money you make, or based on what kind of job you have, or how popular you have. You don't need to define yourself in that way at all. You just define yourself as someone seeking Allah. Then I think a lot of those ups and downs, those disappointments can at least decrease. By the way, it'll still feel difficult. It'll still feel painful at times, and that's okay too. We're not saying you can remove all of this pain suddenly. It's just putting it in perspective.
Inshallah. Mashallah, Doctor. Thanks. The next question, Doctor, I have with me is, I don't have a proper career or education, and I just get through life with a full-time job in administration. I'm happy though with where I am because I have time for other things in life, and I earn enough to get through life. However, people felt that I am not ambitious enough, and I have a negative view of life, like I am too easily satisfied and not willing to do more. Uh, lazy. Is it true? When can I help society that I can aim for more? Yeah, Doctor is smiling, so yeah.
It reminds me of a line, Khalid, Kurt Cobain.
Yes.
He has a line, "I wish I were like you, easily amused."
Oh,
and he's saying that like there are people who are very content, and other people are telling them, "You're not ambitious. You need to try this. You need to go out and do this and gain more and more status or more money." But this person's happy with where they're at. That's it. Like, then that, to me, that's a great state to be in. Like, there is an idea, though, of course, like we should try to fulfill our potential. We should try to get to the level that we can maximize who we are. How can we affect and benefit society around us to the highest degree possible? So we should strive. It doesn't mean you don't try to improve yourself and try to improve your situation. But at the same time, there's something beautiful about just having a low standard of what makes you content, because then you can be pretty much happy with very little. And I tend to think that's a better way to go through life. Like, it's a balance. And then there's also different personalities. Some people, their personality is very driven. They're very motivated. There's certain things they want to succeed in life, and they want to achieve those things, and it makes them happy when they're pursuing that. Other people, they're more content. They're not necessarily in that high competitive mindset, and their personality is different. So I think we need to respect also that we have individual differences. Some people are more in one personality, some people are more in a different personality, and that's okay. We don't have to all be in the same kind of mold, pursuing the same type of thing. So in the end, it's just kind of like, are you happy? Okay, good. Are you happy? Okay, good. Even though they're doing two different things, if they're both happy, then mashallah.
Inshallah, Doctor. I think people need to start listen more to Nirvana and Pearl Jam. That's key. The next question is about someone who we often got this those who are infected with COVID-19. They're watching us live. Every now and then we have they sending me message or question. So this brother, he's been in for 50 days, and he says that he's still going through every week or certain days the swab test whether they still have the disease virus. So he says that at certain times he feel like dropping everything in life, and at certain time he feel, I'm going to pray, I'm going to be focused on Allah. So it's like a topsy-turvy kind of relationship he had with his nerves and with his soul, I would say, right? So how do we find wisdom, Doctor, in trying to find that balance? You have to submit to Allah, but at the same time you have to let it go.
Yeah.
It's not easy. Yeah.
It's very difficult, and I pray Allah blesses all those that are afflicted, and
Ameen.
heals those that are sick. May Allah give them all shifa.
Ameen.
I think, but you said it exactly right. It's a constant struggle. It's up and down. It's never one simple thing. Like, you should, if you're in that state, our scholars would always say, like, tahuran, inshallah, you can consider it a cleansing of your sins, and you're like actually happy that Allah is putting you through this tribulation, because it's gonna lighten your load on the day of judgment, because you've been cleansed by this. But also it can be very demoralizing, and you just feel like low motivation. You don't feel very engaged. You don't feel very, and it may differ from day to day, and that's okay as well. Like, don't be too hard on yourself. Like, we will have moments where you seem more spiritually in tune, and there are other moments where you just feel like you're completely disorganized. You feel like you don't know what to do with yourself. And I think it's just keeping that long-term goal in mind, keeping the long-term in mind, that like, okay, where eventually do I want to be in my relationship with Allah? And even though I'll go through these little ups and downs, I'll know that there's a longer term goal in my mind, which is to get to a place where I feel more at peace in my heart. And so I think the question that you described, it's very typical of people who go through tribulations like this, especially if it's something chronic over time. You have moments when you feel very up and motivated or spiritual. You can feel very zen, like meditative. And there's other moments where you just feel like, I'm tired of this, man. I'm tired of feeling this way. But that's the dunya, man. The dunya is a place of feeling tired and tribulations. So you're actually just feeling what is meant to be felt in this world.
Inshallah. Thank you, Doctor. This last question, Doctor, is a common question in Singapore and maybe even in Malaysia. I'm not too sure about elsewhere. It's about marriage, and you own a degree and you are not married when you are 34, 35 as a woman or man also. So the question is like, this person, I'm not too sure whether it's a brother or sister, is saying that pretty disturbed by the situation that people are pressurizing her to get married, or him to get married. But he or she doesn't find that, and it's not because they are too busy with career, life, and everything. No, but it's just that they don't find the urge yet. But the parents, the immediate families, and all that, they come down hunting on you. But at the same time, you are not ready, and you do not want it. So she felt that this is like imbalance in her life, like pushing it aside and everything. So how do one really know, or is it wrong for them not to have like, I want to get married since I'm 35 and I already have a career, I have a car and everything, or no, you're okay, just be patient and see what Allah has for you, just move slowly. So how does one in such a state find the way to peace? I would say peace.
Yeah. But it sounds like from the question, you're saying that this person is pretty at peace there, but it's the family that's telling them that, like, no, you should be doing this, you should be doing that instead. So I think if you're at peace with where you are, you feel like you don't need to be motivated to pursue something else, whether it's a marriage or a job or a degree more. I think your own mental health and your own spiritual direction and your own personality kind of take precedent in that moment. That kind of defines it for you. If you let other people define your success, then you will always be in a state of like an instability, because you're dependent on other people's opinions of you and your life, and that's very unstable, because other people can have an opinion one day and another opinion another day, and depends on who you're surrounded by. Whereas if you have your own spiritual core, then you can kind of direct through life, in a state of contentment, because you're not worried about what other people think. So I think I encourage people to, find whatever it is that keeps them sane, keeps them stress-free, keeps them focused on what is important in life, and not necessarily have to follow whatever the family or other people or the friends are telling them, as long as it's within, Islamic understandings and guidelines. Yes, it is recommended to get married, but not everybody gets married. Even some of the great scholars in Islam, they never got married, and nobody would say that this person was lacking in their life or there's something. We have to respect the individual differences as well of people, and respect that people have their own personalities and their own ways that they go, and if they're not violating something, they're not doing something that's a direct violation of Islam or anything, then it's fine.
Inshallah. Thank you, Doctor. So with this, we have end this Q&A and also interview, Doctor. I believe it's a very interesting night with you, as usual, as always. Thank you very much, Doctor. I think our society need you more, to hear you more and listen to your advice and your knowledge. MashaAllah. It's very rare to have someone like you, seriously. And we pray that Allah preserve you and your family, that Allah continue to grant you good health for you to continue your work. I just need a favor from you before we end this. We need your closing dua.
MashaAllah. Sure. Yeah, and thank you for inviting me for the talk, Khalid. I always enjoy it. And it sounds like you have very interesting questions, and the community is thinking about very deep, spiritually meaningful things. And I just wanted to say that, being successful is a tricky thing, and we're always told by other people what is the definition of success. And I think if we can have people look toward the Quran too, the Quran has the word muflihun, people of success, and you'll find it in many different verses in the Quran. And so I advise people to just, look up those verses where they talk about the people of success and what meanings. And each verse is slightly different, that you can get it from a different angle, but it'll help you give that spiritual context as well. So I ask Allah to forgive us, to accept from us all of our acts of worship. Al-Fatiha. Oh Allah, we ask you to protect us, to guide us, to keep us on the straight path. Oh Allah, we ask you to remove all systems of oppression and all systems of racism that are oppressing and holding down particular members of our societies across the world. Oh Allah, please empower and strengthen, give aid to our Black brothers and sisters who are oppressed, brown brothers and sisters, all across the world who may be under systems of oppression and colonialism. Allah, we ask you to bring health and healing to the people who are suffering from illnesses, from the viruses, and from all types of tribulations, and to dispel from their hearts and minds all sadness and anxiety. And upon the intentions of our righteous predecessors, with Hadrat Nabi Muhammad, Allahumma salli alayhi wa alihi al-Fatiha.
Thank you, Doctor. See you again, inshallah.
Thank you.
Remember us in your prayer.
You as well, inshallah.
Thank you. Inshallah.
Okay. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam. Alhamdulillah. Just a couple of announcements. Tomorrow morning on Saturday, we continue the online dars with Sidi Imam Talud on the path to Allah. And then 12 afternoon, right? And at night, we will be having a special guest also, Sheikh Ibrahim Skutima, on the title Ramadan and Beyond, the Path of Freedom at 9 p.m. at Sui Ilahi FB page. Right, with this, I say thank you very much for viewing. We hope you have benefit. Remember us in your prayer. May Allah bless you and your family. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.